Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, I asked you guys 3 different polls on Twitter about the Blues next season. So I'm going to be reacting to your responses as well as giving my own thoughts. Should be a fun episode, good way to get you guys involved and all that stuff. Make sure you stay tuned.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, as always, Josh Hyman. If you don't know me, if this is your first time here, thank you for joining. You can follow me on Twitter. You see it right there, Josh Hyman NHL. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On Blues, social media accounts, all that good stuff. Thanks for tuning in. And thanks for anyone out there who's making Locked On Blues your first listen, starting the day with the daily episode, or ending your day with an episode. Anyone that makes this show part of the daily routine, it's the reason why I come back and I keep doing it for you guys. So I appreciate that, truly. Anyways, let's get into it. I asked 3 different questions. I'm going to be getting into each one in each segment of this episode. The first question about the Blues' position in the Central Division at the end of the year. The second question was about how the Blues season will end. And the third question is about the biggest question mark for the St. Louis Blues heading into next season. So let's get started here with the first question. I tweeted out, where will the St. Louis Blues finish in the Central Division? First, second, third, or below fourth place? And it got about 70 replies. So a lot of you guys tuned in. Appreciate that. Gave me some good content for today's episode. The most common answer was second place. 52% of people think the Blues are going to finish in second place. 19% think the Blues are going to finish in first place. 25% think the Blues are going to finish in third place. And 4% of you guys think that the Blues are going to finish in fourth place or below in this upcoming season, which would essentially mean that they miss the playoffs. Which I wouldn't like to see. I think second place is probably about where the Blues are going to end up next year. I don't think there's really any realistic way that they finish ahead of the Colorado Avalanche. We all saw what the Avs did last season. They won the Stanley Cup, and they're probably the best team in hockey right now. They're a regular season juggernaut. They have a ton of offensive weapons. They're going to win a lot of games next year. You could argue that maybe they're going to be a little tired out of the gate due to winning the Stanley Cup, but I don't think that's going to be an issue for them. I think that they're built for regular season success as well as playoff success, and I think they're going to contend for the President's Trophy, not just first place in the Central, and I think that's pretty much a no-brainer. But I think the Blues have a really good chance of finishing right behind them for second place in the division, just because I still think the Blues are a good team. The loss of David Perron isn't a minor loss, but you forget that this is a team that had 9 goal scorers on it last season, and 2 of those guys in Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou are going to continue to get even better than they were last year. So I think that to an extent, Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas's progression will sort of cancel out losing David Perron, and I think offensively the Blues will be fine. Defensively, we know what we're getting there, and it really comes down to that, and as well as Jordan Binnington. In terms of the other teams in the Central Division, I think Minnesota has maybe the best chance of surpassing the Blues for that second spot if the Blues were to end up in third place. I think Minnesota is a really good regular season team as well. They played the Blues really tough last year. And they're just a tough team to beat. They're not going to go away quietly. I do think just like depth wise, the Blues have a bit of an edge over Minnesota. And that's why I kind of still have them finishing ahead of Minnesota. But I could see it go either way. If Kirill Kaprizov takes that next step and becomes like a true superstar, not that he wasn't last year. He was really good last year. But if he continues to ascend and becomes like a absolute franchise cornerstone, I could see Minnesota going on a nice run next season and establishing themselves as a real contender in that Central Division. But I still think that they're going to finish in about third place. And then you look at other teams like Nashville is definitely a question mark. They could be good, but They also might not be. Winnipeg, I don't think I'm too worried about. They don't have much of an identity in their locker room. I don't think that they have a clear direction right now, and I think because of that, they're not going to have as much success. I think they still could be a potential playoff team, but in terms of contending in the Central Division, I would suspect that they would be around third or fourth. And then you got, let's see, Arizona is a new addition to the Central Division, and I don't think that they're going to be much of a contender at all playing in their high school or college hockey arena that seats like 5,000. I don't think that they're going to be much of a threat to contend for a top spot. I'm trying to think, who have I forgotten here? Maybe just Chicago. And, we all have seen what Chicago's been doing this offseason. They've essentially been selling the farm to tank. They might still trade away Patrick Kane and or Jonathan Toews. Chicago's going to win like 15 games next season. There's no reason to believe that they're going to be a serious threat. And that's the other thing is you got to remember that the teams at the bottom of this division, the Blues, are going to be playing quite a few times. And it's going to be hopefully pretty easy to get wins against the teams like Chicago and Arizona. I think it's going to be a pretty competitive race in the Central Division. At the top, I think Colorado, like I said, runs away with it, and that's why I'm pretty sure the Blues are going to end up at like the 2 or maybe the 3, depending on what Minnesota does. But overall, I still think that they make the playoffs, and I think that they, are one of the top teams in the West. I still just don't think anyone's catching Colorado, though. That being said, I'm going to launch into the second question after a short ad break. Tell you guys about our good friends over at betonline.net. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. All right, let's jump into question number 2. So that first one was obviously about where the Blues will end up in the Central Division. The second question was more of a broad question. How will the St. Louis Blues season end? And there were 4 options. It was win the Stanley Cup, late round playoff exit, early round playoff exit. So late round being like, Stanley Cup final, Western Conference final, early round 1 or 2, or miss the playoffs entirely. 18% of you think the Blues are going to win the Stanley Cup, which I hope you're right. It's 18% optimists right there. That's about 20 of you guys. Got 100 votes. So those 20 people, I hope you're right. 25% think the Blues are going to be a late round playoff exit, losing in the Stanley Cup final or losing in the Western Conference final. About 50% of you guys think that the Blues are going to be an early round playoff exit, and then 8% of you think the Blues are going to miss the playoffs. And then there's one reply here that I wanted to read that for those of you that aren't watching on YouTube, there is now a cat on my shoulders. So if you're not on the YouTube channel, you're missing out. This is prime content right here. 8% of you think the Blues are going to miss the playoffs. So I lost track of what I was saying. I already said that. A good reply that kind of aligns with what I think. Unless a miracle happens, this team is losing to Colorado in the second round again. And just being in the same division as the Colorado Avalanche sets you up in a really difficult spot, just because you're going to have to play the best team in the NHL early in the playoffs, likely, unless you somehow end up on the other side of the bracket and you wouldn't have to play them until the third round, or somehow they get eliminated. But because of that, I think, saying the Blues could be an early round playoff exit isn't as pessimistic as it might seem on the surface, because in this case, an early round playoff exit means they get past round 1 and then they're able to, match up with the Colorado Avalanche in round 2. And we saw what happened this past season where I don't want to say they came close to winning, but they definitely gave Colorado a run for their money. I mean, they were one of only 2 teams to actually get a win against the Avalanche in the playoffs, which is pretty impressive. And they could have even gone on to win the series if Jordan Binnington stayed healthy. That's a hot take. It's a conversation for another day. It's a conversation I've had many times already on this podcast. But regardless, I think an early round playoff exit in that sense isn't too much of a disappointment. Obviously, it's disappointing. You want the Blues to win the Stanley Cup. Who doesn't? But being in the same division as the Colorado Avalanche makes it so an early round playoff exit is more likely. I said multiple times this episode that I think Colorado was the best team in the NHL. Hot take, they won the Stanley Cup. Very bold of me to claim that, but it's just puts the Blues in a very tough situation because I think that not only is Colorado the best team in the NHL, I think Colorado is probably the worst matchup for the Blues in the NHL. I think they would fare better against a team like Tampa. In the year that Tampa won like 60 something games, St. Louis was in every game they played against them. I think they lost. They might have lost both of them, or they went 1-1 or something like that. But I think they were 1-goal games. The Blues match up against Tampa pretty well. I just think Colorado's speed and skill is very difficult for how the Blues play. And because of that, I would rather play any other team in the NHL in the playoffs. And I think that the Colorado Avalanche are the Blues' worst matchup nightmare in that sense. So because of that, I think an early round playoff exit is something that is the most likely scenario. But I don't think that it's a guarantee. Only 8% of people thought the Blues were going to miss the playoffs. I do not think the Blues are going to miss the playoffs. I've said this before. The only way that the Blues miss the playoffs is if Jordan Binnington forgets how to be a goalie, which could happen. If the Blues have to rely on, because anything more than just a backup goalie, then the Blues very well might miss the Blues might have missed the playoffs last season if Philly Husso didn't step up. But who knows? I don't think that missing the playoffs happens in any other scenario than something has to go catastrophically wrong. Maybe it's the scoring bump that happened last season regresses, and then the Blues offense goes to crap, or the defense just falls apart. I think the defense is a lot better than it was at the beginning of last year, and like throughout like the first half of last year. And the Blues were still winning games when their defense was playing that poorly. They weren't winning a ton of games, but they were still in a playoff spot. There was really never a point last season where there was worried the Blues were going to miss the playoffs, even when Jordan Binnington was struggling, even when the defense was struggling. They still felt like a playoff team. And even though they did lose David Perron and stuff like that, and you're probably not going to get another 25-goal season out of Ivan Barbashev, and even if the Blues do regress to the mean a little bit, I still think that they have the depth and the talent to be a playoff team. There's no reason to believe that they're going to miss the playoffs. The Central is a pretty interesting division in that sense. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of competition for spots 2 through 5. Even 1 through 6, you could even argue is going to be up in the air if Colorado maybe falters a little bit. But I don't think the Blues are going to miss the playoffs. Could they win the Stanley Cup? Absolutely. I don't think that, minus a couple obvious things, I don't think that this Blues team is all that much worse than the team that won the Stanley Cup. If you really want to get into the nitty gritty, obviously they lost. Their defense looks completely different after winning the Stanley Cup, and that's the biggest thing. Is like the Blues defense is like the reason why they were able to win the Stanley Cup, and it's just not at all the same. But their offense, I think, is a lot better. With the emergence of guys like Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, who weren't a part of that team really at all. And Vladimir Tarasenko returning to form as well. Ryan O'Reilly doing his thing. I think offensively, this honestly is a better Blues team than the one that won the Stanley Cup. It's just defensively and arguably goaltending wise, it is a little bit worse. So I think the Stanley Cup is a possibility. I'm never going to rule that out. I'm wearing the Stanley Cup champion shirt, just to bring those positive vibes. It definitely could happen. I still would put the Blues right outside of that like top tier contender status. I think they're still a good solid playoff team, but I think they're not quite there in terms of being up there with like Colorado and Tampa and arguably Florida. It's tough, but I have high hopes for next season, and I'm glad to see a lot of you guys on Twitter do too. With only less than 10% of y'all picking them to miss the playoffs, I honestly was worried that the consensus on the Blues would be a lot worse, but it really does come down to a certain few question marks. And coincidentally, that was my third question was, what are the biggest question marks, or what is the biggest question mark for the St. Louis Blues heading into next season? So in this third and final segment, I'm going to be going over the options for that poll and giving my thoughts as well. Make sure you stay tuned. All right, let's jump into this final segment of the episode. I asked you guys on Twitter one final poll. I said, what is the biggest question mark for the St. Louis Blues this season? The options were offense, defense, goaltending, or coaching. Now, the interesting thing right off the bat is there were 0 votes for coaching. I didn't think that there was going to be a common answer. I kind of wanted to just throw a fourth option out there just to even out the poll. But I'm surprised. There were times last season where Tommy and I kind of called into question Craig Berube's coaching style and said, if maybe his coaching style doesn't match the roster. And I still think that might be true. I think that a better coach, not a better coach, but there are certain coaching styles out there that would fit the Blues better. That doesn't necessarily mean that they would have as much success with that other coach. I think in terms of being like a motivator and keeping players engaged, I think Craig Berube is second to none at that. And I think does a tremendous job of that. But in terms of scheme fit, I think guys like Jordan Kyrou would be even better under a more offensive-minded coach. But that doesn't always translate to team success. So I'm surprised that nobody picked coaching as a question mark. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't a question mark. It's just not the biggest question mark. The second least common answer was offense. Only 19% of people think the offense is the biggest question mark, and I agree. I'm honestly more confident in the offense than I am in the coaching, just because the depth scoring the Blues got last year was ridiculous. 920 goal scorers, guys like Ivan Barbashev scoring 20 plus goals, Vladimir Tarasenko returning to form, Robert Thomas having a breakout season, Jordan Kyrou continuing his great success. I think that the offense is a lock, even with losing David Perron. I still think the Blues offense is going to be one of the most potent offenses in the NHL. They're going to be scoring a ton of goals a game. And, I'm not worried about that at all. I would be shocked if, somehow we're sitting here at the end of the season, the Blues offense was better. We'd be in a playoff spot, or we'd be contending for a Stanley Cup. I don't foresee that happening at all. The second most common answer, I should say, was goaltending. 29% of people picked goaltending as the biggest question mark, which I'm surprised. I expected that to be number one, because to me that is number one. The Blues season in its entirety hinges upon goaltending. You know what you're getting out of the offense. You know what you're getting out of the defense. Yes, the defense is underwhelming, and the defense isn't as good as it could be, or maybe should be to be a contender, but the one thing that is going to determine whether or not the Blues make the playoffs is Jordan Binnington. If he plays like he played in the Blues Cup run, they could honestly contend for a President's Trophy. I know that sounds like a hot take, but the Blues won a lot of games last year. The Blues have a really potent offense, and if your goaltender is playing lights out and you're scoring as many goals as the Blues can score, it's going to be a very, very, very hard team to beat. But the flip side of that is Jordan Binnington maybe just plays average, and the Blues have to work a little bit harder for games and then for wins. And all of a sudden, the defense is a little bit more under the microscope and stuff like that. I think it really all stems out from Jordan Binnington. The offense can be great, but if the offense is scoring, 3+ goals a game, and they're also getting scored on 3 or 4 times, you can only score so much if your defense and your goaltending isn't playing well, specifically your goaltending. If your goaltender isn't playing well, it doesn't matter how many goals you score, you're still going to lose some games that you should have won. So to me, goaltending is the biggest question mark, but over half of you guys picked defense as the biggest question mark. And I don't even know if I would consider it a question mark. I think we know that the Blues defense is just underwhelming. However, it looked better when Nick Leddy joined the team. It definitely seemed like they had things figured out. Nick Leddy brought a piece to the defense that they were severely lacking in, his ability to move the puck and break the puck out of the zone and that stuff. And because of that, I think that it's a lot less of a question mark than it was. I think the Blues defense was the biggest question mark up until that acquisition. They have a solid top four locked up. It's not a great top four. It's not a top of the league top four, but Torrey Krug, Colton Parayko, Justin Falk, Nick Leddy, that's a decent top four. That is a playoff caliber top four defensively. Is that a Stanley Cup winning top four defensively? But I don't even know if I would consider it the biggest question mark on the team, just because it's good enough. I think if it definitely would be nice if the defense was better, because my whole rant about how Jordan Binnington is the biggest X factor for the season. If he had a good defense in front of him, it would certainly be a lot easier for him to play well. But I think the defense is capable of playing well enough to where if Jordan Binnington just plays good hockey, the Blues will win games. Like I said, the Blues aren't going to be a top defensive team in the NHL with their core, but they're going to be above average. And with their offense, it really, like I said, just comes down to goaltending. So I had a lot of fun with this episode, asking you guys poll questions. I might start doing that more in the future, just because it's a good way to get you guys engaged and also give me, 3 solid segmented topics, or maybe I could do more polls next time, whatever. So if you guys have any ideas for polls or questions that you want me to ask, let me know, whether it's in the YouTube comments or Twitter, whatever, just reach out. I'm always looking for ideas. It's tougher in the off season to come up with, full episodes worth of content. So I enjoyed this. It was a little experiment. I hope you guys did too. Like I said, good way to get y'all involved and stuff like that. But that being said, that is all the time I have for this episode. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to me on. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On Blues. Hit the notification bell. That way, whenever I upload a new episode, you'll be the first to know. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL, or you can follow Locked On Blues on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Locked On Blues. Thank you all so much for listening, and as always, let's go Blues.